I should have known that something was wrong the moment my phone started ringing nonstop, the screen lighting up with missed calls from my mother, my stepfather, and, of course, my stepbrother Dylan, whose name alone was enough to make my stomach drop. Dylan never called me unless he needed something, never reached out unless there was a problem, never acknowledged me unless he was backed into a corner and looking for a way out. So when I saw his name flashing across my screen, I already knew that whatever had happened, it wasn't going to be good. I let the phone ring a few more times before finally picking up, pressing it to my ear with a sigh, bracing myself for whatever excuse he was about to throw at me, already tired before he even spoke a word. "Hey, Jess," Dylan said, his voice overly casual, too forced, too light, the kind of tone he used when he was trying to soften a blow. So, don't freak out, okay? It's not that bad, really, but I kinda, had a little accident with your car. For a long moment, I didn't say anything, didn't breathe, didn't react, just let the words settle into my mind, my grip tightening around the phone as a cold wave of anger began building in my chest. My car, the one I had worked overtime to afford, the one I made payments on every single month, the one I had never even given him permission to take, was now, according to him, part of a little accident, a phrase so casual it made my skin crawl. "What do you mean, a little accident?" I asked, my voice low, steady, dangerously calm, the kind of calm that usually meant I was moments away from losing it completely. "Well, you know how it is," Dylan continued, still laughing like this was some minor inconvenience, still talking like this was just another one of his stupid mistakes that someone else would clean up for him. "These things happen all the time, right? One second I was driving, the next, bam, some guy cut me off, and I swerved a little too hard, and, yeah, the car kinda flipped." I almost dropped the phone, my body tensing, my stomach twisting violently, my heartbeat pounding in my ears as his words hit me like a sledgehammer, the full reality of what he was saying crashing over me like a tidal wave. He had flipped my car, the one I had worked for, the one I had taken care of, the one I had built my independence around, and all he could do was shrug it off like it was nothing. Like it was just another minor inconvenience that he wouldn't have to deal with. "You flipped my car?" I repeated, my voice no longer calm, no longer steady, no longer anything but pure, unfiltered rage. "Are you kidding me right now?"
Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
"Jess, come on," he groaned, as if I was the unreasonable one, as if I was the one making a big deal out of nothing, as if I was the problem here. "It's just a car, all right? Insurance will cover it, no big deal. I mean, it's not like I did it on purpose." I could feel my entire body shaking, could feel my blood boiling, could feel every single ounce of self-control slipping through my fingers as I clenched my jaw, my knuckles turning white around my phone. "Not like you did it on purpose?" I repeated, letting out a short, humorless laugh, one that held nothing but sheer disbelief. "Dylan, you stole my car without asking, wrecked it beyond repair, and you think that's supposed to make me feel better?" Before he could respond, my mother's voice cut through the line, her tone exasperated, already jumping in to defend him, already treating this like just another one of his minor slip-ups that should be excused without question. "Jessica, enough," she said sharply, as if I was the one out of line, as if I was the one being difficult, as if I was the one making this situation worse than it needed to be. "It was an accident. Your brother didn't mean to crash the car. Do you really think yelling at him is going to fix anything?" I closed my eyes, inhaling sharply, willing myself to stay calm, willing myself to not explode, willing myself to not let the sheer audacity of her words push me past the breaking point. "He's not my brother," I said through gritted teeth, my patience hanging on by a thread. "And this isn't just some accident. This is thousands of dollars of damage. This is my car completely totaled. This is—" "We'll figure it out," she interrupted, her voice filled with the same dismissive tone she always used when I tried to hold Dylan accountable. The same tone that told me she had already decided that I was overreacting, that I was making a big deal out of nothing, that she had no intention of actually making him take responsibility. "But you will cover the costs, right?" I mean, he's family, Jessica. That's what family does. I actually laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that startled even me, a sound that held nothing but sheer disbelief, because of course this was how they were going to play it, of course this was what they expected. Of course this was just another example of the never-ending cycle of Dylan screwing up and me being the one expected to fix it. But something inside me shifted in that moment, something snapped, something hardened, something cold and calculated settled deep in my chest, and suddenly, the anger wasn't overwhelming anymore, wasn't something suffocating, wasn't something out of control. Instead, it became something else, something sharper, something more dangerous, something that felt a lot like clarity. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, and when I spoke again, my voice was smooth, calm, free of emotion, free of any sign of the fury burning beneath the surface. Of course, I said, forcing a smile into my voice, letting them believe, just for a moment, that I was giving in, that I was agreeing to their ridiculous expectations, that I was still the person they thought they could push around. I'll take care of it. Because if they thought I was going to pay for Dylan's mistakes without consequences, if they thought I was just going to accept this and move on, if they thought for even a second that I wasn't going to make them regret ever expecting me to clean up their mess, then they had no idea what was coming next. I sat in my car outside their house for what felt like hours, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, my breath slow and controlled. My entire body shaking with the effort it took to keep myself from marching back inside and screaming at them until they finally understood just how wrong they were. I wanted to shout, wanted to throw every unfair moment in their faces, wanted to make them see that this wasn't just about the car. It was about every single time they had let Dylan get away with something that would have ruined me if I had done the same. I wanted to ask them why it had always been my responsibility to be the one who sacrificed, the one who cleaned up messes that weren't mine, the one who was expected to act like an adult even when the so-called adults in my family refused to do the same. But I already knew the answer, didn't I? It was the same answer it had always been. Because Dylan was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one they coddled and protected from consequences like he was made of glass, while I was the reliable one, the responsible one, the one they could count on to take the fall because they knew I would never walk away completely. If it had been me who crashed his car, they would have demanded that I pay for it immediately, would have thrown responsibility in my face like a knife, would have told me that this was just a lesson in adulthood, that I needed to own up to my mistakes. But because it was Dylan? Because it was their perfect, reckless son who had never worked for anything a day in his life? Suddenly, it was just an accident, just a minor inconvenience, just something that I, of course, would take care of like I always did. I could have fought back in that moment, could have argued, could have refused, could have made it clear that I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me again, but what would have been the point? They would have called me dramatic, would have told me to stop being selfish, would have twisted my anger into something ugly, something unreasonable, something that was somehow my fault instead of Dylan's, just like they always did. Fighting with them wouldn't change anything, wouldn't suddenly make them realize that they had been enabling him for years, wouldn't magically turn them into parents who valued fairness over favoritism. So I did the only thing I could do. I smiled, nodded, pretended to agree, and let them think they had won. I kept my voice light, kept my expression neutral, kept every ounce of resentment buried so deep inside me that they didn't even notice the shift, didn't even realize that I had already decided I wasn't just going to roll over and take it this time. I told them that of course I would cover the costs, that of course I understood it was an accident, that of course I wouldn't hold it against Dylan because he was family, and that's what family did. I let them believe their own twisted logic, let them pat themselves on the back for handling the situation so smoothly, let them bask in the illusion that they had once again managed to manipulate me into cleaning up their mess. Then, the moment I left, I started planning how to burn it all to the ground. I knew I had to be smart about it, knew that whatever I did had to be legal, airtight, impossible for them to wriggle out of, knew that it had to be something they couldn't twist back on me, something they couldn't argue their way out of, something that would force them to finally feel the weight of their own hypocrisy. It wasn't enough to just make Dylan pay. I wanted my parents to feel it too, wanted them to finally understand what it felt like to be used, to be expected to give without hesitation, to be told that their feelings didn't matter because family came first. So I started researching, digging into my options, looking at financing agreements, car loan contracts, legal loopholes that would let me shift the financial burden back onto them without a single misstep. I talked to a friend in finance, asked a few hypothetical questions, made sure that whatever I was about to do was going to be rock solid, legally sound, and completely irreversible. Every time I thought about their smug faces, about Dylan's casual indifference, about the way they had dismissed my anger like it was nothing, it only made me work harder, made me more determined, made me more certain that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. By the time I had everything figured out, by the time every piece of my plan was set in place, by the time I was standing inside a car dealership with a contract in my hand, signing my name to something that was going to change everything, I didn't feel an ounce of doubt. I didn't hesitate, didn't question whether or not I was going too far, didn't stop to wonder if maybe I should just let it go like they expected me to. Because the truth was, this wasn't just about the car, wasn't just about Dylan, wasn't just about one bad decision. This was about every time they had told me to put him first. This was about every time they had made me feel like I wasn't worth as much as him. This was about years of being dismissed, overlooked, undervalued, and taken advantage of, and finally getting the chance to make them feel what I had felt for so long. So as I signed my name one last time and set the pen down, as I took the keys to a brand new, ridiculously expensive car, as I walked out of the dealership with a contract that listed my parents as the financial guarantors, I felt nothing but satisfaction. Because the next time they expected me to clean up Dylan's mess, the next time they assumed I would just take responsibility without hesitation, the next time they looked at me and saw someone who would always put up with their favoritism without question, they were going to be in for the shock of their lives. And the best part? There wasn't a single thing they could do to stop it. Walking into that luxury dealership felt like stepping into a completely different world, a world where people didn't flinch at six-figure price tags, where the scent of fresh leather and polished chrome filled the air, where salesmen in tailored suits circled like sharks, each one trained to spot a customer who wasn't just browsing. I had spent the last few nights researching every possible option, running the numbers, making sure that every part of my plan was ironclad, legally airtight, and completely irreversible. If my parents wanted to pretend that covering the cost of Dylan's recklessness was just part of being a family, then I was going to make damn sure they understood exactly what that meant. I had gone through every possibility, every angle, every potential loophole they might try to use to wiggle out of this, and I had made sure there wasn't a single escape route left for them. By the time I arrived at the dealership, I knew exactly what I was looking for, exactly what I needed to make this plan work, exactly what kind of statement I wanted to make when I rolled up to their house and handed them the bill. This couldn't just be any car, it had to be something over the top, something that screamed luxury, something that they could never justify paying for, something that would make their jaws hit the floor when they realized it was their problem now. A slick-looking salesman approached me almost immediately, his professional smile sharp and confident, his eyes scanning me as if he was trying to decide whether or not I actually belonged in a place like this. He probably thought I was some 20-something idiot wasting his time, someone who had walked in just to take selfies next to a sports car, someone who would ask too many questions and leave without spending a dime. I could practically hear his internal debate as he greeted me, his tone polite but skeptical, his enthusiasm carefully measured as if he wasn't quite sure how seriously to take me. "Good afternoon, miss," he said, his voice smooth, well-practiced, the kind of voice designed to make people feel important while subtly guiding them toward a purchase. "What kind of vehicle are you looking for today?" I smiled, taking my time as I let my gaze drift across the showroom, letting the tension hang in the air for just a few seconds before answering, enjoying the feeling of knowing something he didn't, something no one in this building could possibly predict. "I'm looking for something high-end," I said, keeping my voice cool and confident, watching as his expression shifted, as his interest sharpened, as he realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't wasting his time after all. Something sleek, something flashy, something that makes a statement. Price isn't an issue. That last part caught his attention completely, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant, his polite curiosity morphing into full-fledged excitement, his sales instincts kicking in as he gestured for me to follow him deeper into the showroom. He started rattling off specs, highlighting different models, pointing out the latest upgrades, trying to gauge my interest, trying to figure out exactly what kind of buyer I was. But I wasn't listening to most of what he was saying because my eyes had already landed on exactly what I wanted, exactly what I needed to make this plan hit harder than they ever could have expected. A brand new luxury sedan sat in the center of the showroom floor, its sleek black paint gleaming under the overhead lights, its leather interior visible through the open driver's side door. Every inch of it radiating a level of wealth and extravagance that my parents would never, in a million years, willingly spend money on. It was the kind of car Dylan would drool over but never be able to afford, the kind of car my parents would scoff at as wasteful, the kind of car that would make this entire stunt absolutely impossible to ignore. This one, I said, cutting off whatever sales pitch the guy had been about to launch into, watching as his expression brightened at the realization that I wasn't just here to look, I was here to buy. I'll take this one. From there, the process moved quickly, the salesman guiding me through paperwork, his enthusiasm growing with every signature, his excitement barely concealed as I handed over the necessary documents, as I secured the financing under my parents' names, ensuring that they, not me, would be responsible for every single payment, every single fee, every single financial burden that came with this ridiculously expensive car. The contract was legally solid, binding in every way, leaving no loopholes, no way for them to dodge it, no way for them to argue that this wasn't fair, because in their own words, family takes care of family. And they had made it clear that Dylan's mistakes were my responsibility to cover. Except this time, I had flipped the script. This time, I had made sure that when the bill came due, it wouldn't be my problem, it would be theirs. By the time I drove off the lot, the engine humming beneath my hands, the weight of the plan finally settling into place, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: satisfaction, control, the quiet thrill of knowing that I wasn't just getting even. I was getting ahead. I could already picture their reactions, already hear the stunned silence, already see the moment when they finally realized what I had done. All I had to do now was wait for the perfect moment to drop the bomb. The drive to my parents' house felt different this time, the smooth hum of the engine beneath my hands a sharp contrast to the tight coil of anticipation sitting low in my stomach. Every mile bringing me closer to the moment I had been planning since the second they decided I was nothing more than their financial safety net. I could already picture their faces, could already hear the fake warmth in their voices, could already see the smug satisfaction in my stepfather's eyes as he assumed, without hesitation, that I had finally come to my senses and accepted my role as the responsible one, the one who fixes things, the one who pays without question because that's what they had trained me to do. As I pulled into their driveway, the sun reflecting off the deep black paint of the car, the leather seats cool against my skin, I took a slow, measured breath, forcing my expression into something neutral, something unreadable. Something that wouldn't give away the fact that I wasn't here to apologize, wasn't here to make peace, wasn't here to do what they expected me to do. I stepped out, shutting the door with a deliberate slowness, letting them hear the soft, luxurious click of the latch settling into place, letting them take in the sight of the vehicle, the obvious wealth it radiated, the kind of expensive, over-the-top purchase that I had never even considered before, the kind of thing that made them think, just for a moment, that they had won. I barely made it 3 steps toward the house before my mother came outside, her smile already in place, her arms already opening as if she expected me to walk straight into her embrace. As if she thought for even a second that I had come here for anything other than to set fire to everything they had built their delusions on. "Oh, sweetheart, I knew you'd do the right thing," she gushed, her voice dripping with fake relief, with the same condescending tone she always used when she thought she had manipulated me into submission. "I knew you wouldn't let a silly mistake ruin things between us. And this car. My goodness, it's beautiful. Did the insurance cover it already?" I smiled, taking my time, letting the silence stretch, watching as my stepfather stepped out onto the porch, his arms crossing over his chest, his expression smug and expectant, the look of a man who believed, truly, completely believed, that I had come here to fall in line, to accept my place, to quietly eat the injustice like I always had before. Dylan followed a moment later, his usual cocky, careless expression painted across his face, as if the idea that I might actually hold him accountable had never once crossed his mind, as if he still believed, deep down, that I would always take the hit so he wouldn't have to. I let them enjoy the illusion for just a few seconds longer before I pulled the thick envelope from my bag, flipping it over in my hands, making sure they saw the weight of it, making sure they understood that whatever this was, it wasn't something they could ignore. My mother's smile faltered just slightly, the first flicker of unease crossing her features as she glanced down at the papers in my hand. As her mind began scrambling to make sense of why I hadn't just laughed this off and accepted the damage like she had assumed I would. I extended the envelope toward her, my expression still calm, still composed, still completely unreadable as I spoke the words I had been waiting to say for days. "I wanted to make sure you got these," I said, my voice light, casual, as if this was nothing more than a simple transaction, as if I hadn't just placed a financial bomb in her hands with a smile on my face. She hesitated for only a second before taking the papers, her fingers trembling just slightly as she slid them out of the envelope, her eyes scanning the words, her lips parting as confusion twisted into realization. Realization hardened into disbelief, and disbelief exploded into something closer to panic. My stepfather leaned in, his face darkening as he took in the neatly printed figures, the unmistakable contract confirming that the financing for the car was entirely in their names, the payments locked in, the debt secured. The responsibility shifted directly onto the people who had demanded that I cover it because Dylan was family. This isn't right," my mother stammered, shaking her head as if denying it could somehow change the reality of the situation, her hands tightening around the papers, her breath hitching in her throat. "Jessica, this isn't what we agreed to." I arched an eyebrow, tilting my head just slightly, my smile never slipping, my tone still as smooth as silk as I answered. "Oh, I thought we all agreed that family takes care of family," I said, letting the words roll off my tongue like poison, letting them feel every ounce of the hypocrisy they had been shoving down my throat for years. "You told me I'd cover the cost because Dylan is family. So I did. I just made sure it was your responsibility this time." Dylan's face paled, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, his hands twitching at his sides as he tried to find a way out, tried to form an argument, tried to backpedal before the full weight of reality crushed him completely. "You can't seriously expect us to pay for this," my stepfather snapped, his voice sharp, desperate, already slipping into anger because anger was easier than admitting he had been outplayed, easier than admitting that he had underestimated me, easier than admitting that he had been the one caught in a trap this time. I shrugged, my eyes locking onto his, my voice perfectly even as I delivered the final blow. "Well," I said, exhaling slowly, savoring the moment, "you didn't expect me to pay for Dylan's mistake, but you sure as hell demanded it anyway. So yeah, actually, I do expect you to pay for this. Because that's what family does, right?" And with that, I turned on my heel, leaving them standing there in stunned silence, their carefully crafted reality shattered around them in a way that they couldn't fix, couldn't smooth over, couldn't manipulate their way out of. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one left cleaning up the mess. For the first time in my life, they were. The moment I turned to walk away, the silence behind me was thick and suffocating, the kind of silence that only comes when people have just realized they are truly and completely screwed with no way out. It lasted for just a few seconds, a brief, beautiful pause where I could feel them struggling to process what had just happened, where I knew they were standing there grappling with the horrifying truth that for once, they were the ones stuck paying the price for their own decisions. Then, just as I had expected, just as I had counted on, the explosion came. "Jessica, get back here right now." My mother shrieked, her voice high and sharp, cracking at the edges with barely contained rage, the exact same tone she used when she really wanted to remind me that she was the one in control. Except this time, she wasn't, and no amount of yelling was going to change that. I paused at the bottom of the porch steps, turning back just enough to watch the full meltdown begin unfolding in real time, my mother's face twisted in disbelief. My stepfather already flipping through the documents as if rereading them would somehow make them different. Dylan looking like a trapped animal caught in a snare, his confidence finally wiped off his face. It was glorious. "You can't just dump this on us," my stepfather snapped, his grip on the papers so tight that his hands were shaking, his face red, his voice rising with every syllable, as if volume alone could make this situation disappear. "This is fraud. This is illegal. There's no way in hell we're paying for this." I smirked, crossing my arms over my chest, my voice calm, steady, completely unbothered as I shrugged. "Actually," I said, savoring the moment, "it's completely legal. Your names are right there on the paperwork. You agreed to be the guarantors. Every single signature is legitimate, and trust me, I made sure there's no loophole you can use to get out of it." My mother made a strangled noise in the back of her throat, flipping through the papers with trembling fingers, her eyes darting across the fine print, looking for anything, any tiny detail that would let her weasel out of this. When she found nothing, when it sank in that this was real, that there was no magic fix, that they were actually trapped in the exact same situation they had tried to shove me into, her breath hitched, and then, right on cue, the guilt tripping began. "Jessica," she whispered, her tone suddenly softer, her entire body language shifting as she morphed into the heartbroken, betrayed mother she always pretended to be when she wanted me to cave. "Sweetheart, you know we can't afford this. This is cruel. We're your parents. How could you do this to us?" I exhaled slowly, tilting my head, letting my expression shift into something unreadable, something cold, something dangerously close to amusement, because she had no idea how little I cared about her manipulations anymore. "Oh, you mean like how I couldn't afford to cover thousands of dollars for a car Dylan destroyed, but you didn't care because he's family?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, watching the way she flinched at her own words being thrown back at her. "You had no problem telling me to take responsibility for something I didn't do, but now that it's your turn, suddenly it's unfair? Interesting." She shook her head quickly, tears welling in her eyes, her breath hitching as she leaned into the performance even more, because if screaming didn't work, if logic didn't work, then guilt was always her final weapon. "But we're your parents," she repeated, her voice breaking just enough to make it believable. "We've done so much for you. We've given you everything. And now you're just throwing us away over money." I actually laughed, the sound sharp and bitter, my chest tightening with the sheer absurdity of hearing her try to rewrite history in real time. As if I hadn't spent my entire life being treated like an afterthought while Dylan got everything handed to him on a silver platter. "Oh, that's rich," I muttered, shaking my head, my eyes narrowing as I took a step closer, just enough to watch the panic flicker in her expression, just enough to make sure she knew, deep down, that I was done playing the role of the obedient daughter. "You've given me everything? Are you actually serious right now? The only thing you ever gave me was the expectation that I'd always be the one cleaning up Dylan's messes. Well, congratulations, Mom. You wanted me to act like part of the family? Now you get to cover for him just like you expected me to." Dylan, who had been silent up until that point, finally cracked under the pressure, his face going pale, his hands twitching at his sides, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts as he realized there was no way out this time, no one coming to save him. No easy escape from the consequences he had never once had to face before. "This isn't fair," he blurted out suddenly, his voice shaky, his panic bubbling over as he turned to me, desperation clinging to every word. "Jess, come on, you know this isn't fair. I didn't mean to crash the car. I didn't ask for this to happen." I met his gaze without a shred of sympathy, my arms still crossed, my expression completely blank as I took in the sheer audacity of him trying to act like he was the victim here. "You didn't ask for this to happen?" I repeated slowly, shaking my head, laughing under my breath at the sheer entitlement dripping from every syllable. "You stole my car. You totaled it. You shrugged it off like it was nothing, and you fully expected me to pay for it without complaint. So no, Dylan, I don't care that you didn't mean to crash it. I care that you've never had to pay for a single mistake in your entire life. He opened his mouth, probably to throw out another excuse, another weak attempt at getting me to back down, but I didn't give him the chance. Instead, I leaned in just slightly, my voice low, my words slow and deliberate, making sure he felt every syllable hit like a punch to the gut. You can either get a job and start making payments, I said calmly, watching his throat bob as he swallowed hard, or you can deal with the debt collectors when you default. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. And with that, I turned around, walked back to my car and drove away, leaving them standing there with the mess they had created, with no one to bail them out, with no one to shift the blame onto. For the first time in my life, watching them struggle wasn't my burden to carry anymore. For the first time ever, they had to deal with the consequences of their own choices. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from my decision unraveled exactly the way I had expected it to, with Dylan flailing under the weight of responsibility for the first time in his life. My parents seething with resentment over a situation they had brought entirely upon themselves, and the rest of the family splitting into two very distinct camps, those who thought I had finally delivered the justice that had been a long time coming, and those who thought I had taken things way too far. It was fascinating, really, watching people react, watching them scramble to process what had happened, watching them either cheer me on or clutch their pearls over the sheer audacity of me finally standing up for myself instead of playing along with the role I had been assigned since childhood. Dylan, unsurprisingly, had a complete meltdown in the beginning, alternating between tantrums and desperate attempts to escape the consequences he had never once imagined would land at his feet. He tried everything, from begging my parents to somehow fix this for him, to looking for loopholes in the contract, to claiming that he was being unfairly punished for a mistake. But no matter how much he whined, no matter how many times he tried to play the victim, the debt was still there, looming over him like a storm cloud he couldn't outrun, and for the first time ever, he was the one stuck figuring out how to deal with it instead of dumping it on someone else. I heard through the family grapevine that he had no choice but to get a job, a real one, not one of those fake, temporary gigs he always quit the second he got bored or things got too difficult. He started working at some warehouse, long shifts, overtime, the kind of labor he had always sneered at, forced to wake up early, forced to take orders from people he once would have considered beneath him, forced to actually earn money the hard way instead of having it handed to him. And honestly, it was poetic. It was perfectly, deliciously fitting that after years of dodging accountability, he was finally learning what it felt like to be the one paying for someone else's mess. Except in this case, it wasn't someone else's, it was his own. And there was no one left to absorb the blow for him. My parents, of course, were livid, not just at the situation itself, but at the fact that they had completely miscalculated their ability to control me, at the realization that I wasn't the same naive pushover they had spent years molding me into, at the horrifying truth that they had no power left over me anymore. My mother tried calling me, over and over again at first, leaving angry voicemails that gradually turned into guilt-ridden pleas, shifting between rage and sorrow as she desperately tried to get me to reconsider, to fix things, to undo what had been done. But I never answered. I let every single call go to voicemail, let every message sit unheard, let every attempt she made to reel me back in fall flat, because I finally understood that nothing I said, nothing I did, nothing I ever proved would make them see me as anything other than their financial safety net. And once I let go of the need for them to change, once I accepted the fact that they would never love me the way they loved Dylan, that they would never see me as anything other than useful, that they would never take accountability for the way they had treated me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, free, weightless, completely unburdened by the suffocating pressure of trying to be good enough for people who would never appreciate it. So I made my decision. I cut them off completely. Some of my extended family supported me, cheered me on, called me brilliant, told me that it was about time someone forced my parents and Dylan to face reality, that they had let him get away with far too much for far too long. Others, however, were horrified, clutching their chests as if I had personally shattered the sacred bond of family, as if I had committed some unspeakable betrayal by refusing to be used anymore. They called me cruel, called me petty, told me I had taken things way too far, that I should have found a way to resolve things peacefully, as if there had ever been a peaceful way to make them take responsibility, as if my parents hadn't spent years making it clear that they only valued me as long as I was useful to them. And maybe they were right. Maybe I had been ruthless. Maybe I had gone too far. Maybe I had turned into someone unrecognizable, someone colder, someone sharper, someone who no longer cared about playing the role of the good daughter, the responsible sibling, the one who took care of things no matter how unfair it was. But then, when I let myself consider the alternative, when I imagined what my life would have looked like if I had backed down, if I had given in, if I had let them walk all over me just one more time, I knew, deep down, that I had done exactly what needed to be done. I hadn't destroyed my family. They had destroyed themselves the second they decided that my love and loyalty were only worth as much as the money they could take from me. Sitting alone in my apartment that night, I let the silence settle around me, the kind of silence that felt heavier than it should have, the kind that carried the weight of finality, the kind that made it clear that no matter how much satisfaction I had felt in the moment, no matter how much they deserved what happened, no matter how justified I had been, things would never be the same again. There was no going back now, no undoing what I had done, no pretending that I hadn't just burned whatever fragile ties had been holding us together. I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't just about a car. This was about years of neglect, of favoritism, of watching them protect Dylan while throwing me to the wolves, of being told that I was responsible enough to handle things while Dylan was too delicate to face consequences, of realizing that the only time I was valuable to them was when I was useful. But now, as I sat there, replaying everything in my head, I had to wonder, had I gone too far? Had I crossed a line I couldn't uncross? Had I let my anger turn me into the very kind of person I had always despised? There was a moment, just before I had handed them the contract, just before I watched their faces twist in horror, just before I saw Dylan stumble through his first taste of actual consequences, that I had felt something close to guilt, something deep and nagging. Something that whispered that maybe, just maybe, I had let my resentment get the best of me. Because no matter how much they had wronged me, no matter how many times they had used me, no matter how much pain they had caused me over the years, I had never been the kind of person who took pleasure in watching people suffer. And yet, I had stood there and watched them squirm, watched their panic rise, watched them grasp for excuses, for ways out, for anything that would allow them to avoid taking responsibility, and instead of feeling pity, I had felt victorious. Instead of feeling remorse, I had felt powerful. Instead of regretting my actions, I had relished every second of it. So what did that make me? Was I still the person who had simply wanted fairness, or had I turned into someone who needed them to suffer the way I had suffered? Had I taught them a lesson, or had I become exactly what they had always accused me of being: selfish, cruel, heartless, the kind of person who would throw away family over money? I knew that's what they would tell themselves. I knew that in their version of events, I would be the villain, the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her parents, the vindictive sister who ruined Dylan's life over a mistake, the cold-hearted woman who had lost sight of what really mattered. They would never acknowledge the years of unfairness, the years of being taken advantage of, the years of watching Dylan walk away from everything unscathed while I was held to impossible standards. They would only see this moment, only see my decision, only see what it had cost them, never once stopping to consider what they had already taken from me. But if I had to be the villain to finally break free from them, if I had to be the bad guy in order to stop being their financial safety net, if I had to let them believe I was heartless just so I could finally live my life without being weighed down by their expectations, then maybe I could live with that. Maybe I could accept that justice doesn't always look pretty, that sometimes the only way to even the scales is to tip them so far in the other direction that the imbalance is finally undeniable. So I sat there, staring at my phone, at the dozens of unread messages from family members weighing in on my decision, at the voicemails from my mother that had started out angry and ended in broken sobs, at the missed calls from Dylan that I knew, deep down, were nothing more than desperate attempts to find a way out of the mess he had created. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the overwhelming urge to fix it. I didn't feel the need to apologize, didn't feel the weight of their disappointment crushing me, didn't feel like I had to justify my actions to anyone. For the first time ever, I wasn't the one carrying the burden. So maybe I had gone too far. Maybe I had let my anger push me past the point of no return. Maybe I had done something I could never fully undo. But maybe, just maybe, I had only given them exactly what they had always asked of me. Maybe I had finally done the right thing. But what do you think? Would you have done the same?